So we have a new monarch, King Charles III, and we're having to get used to singing the national anthem with changed lyrics. I remember soon after the announcement of the Queen's death, King Charles met with Liz Truss, the then newly appointed Prime Minister, where he was overheard to say, "I have been dreading this day." I don't think he meant meeting Liz Truss. The problem was that he had not only just lost his mum, but he had a hard act to follow. To be honest, Queen Elizabeth II's reign had been so long, so gracious, extending stability and security for the nation over most of our lifetimes, that it seemed impossible that it would ever end. Her death was a shock and an adjustment for us all. We don't as yet know what gifts and attributes King Charles will bring to his reign, nor how he will compare to his mother as sovereign. All we do know is that he will certainly not reign for 70 years. Good and bad queens and kings have reigned throughout our nation's history and throughout the history of the world. The Bible is full of the influence of good and bad kings and queens. But as we are considering our theme of Christ the King today, what makes a king bad or good? What is the influence of power? And what is truth? Before we look at those issues in closer detail, I'll tell you a little story. A king had 10 wild dogs. He used them to torture and kill any of his ministers that misguided him. These are government ministers, you understand. So one of his ministers once gave an opinion which was wrong and which the king didn't like at all. So he ordered that the minister to be thrown to the dogs. The minister said, "I served you loyally for 10 years and you do this?" The king was unrelenting. The minister pleaded, "Please give me 10 days before you throw me to the dogs." So the king agreed. In those 10 days, the minister went to the keeper of the dogs and told him he wanted to serve the dogs for the next 10 days. The guard was baffled, but he agreed. So the minister started feeding the dogs, caring for them, bathing them, providing all sorts of comfort for them. So when the 10 days were up, the king ordered that the minister must be thrown to the dogs as sentenced. When he was thrown in, everyone was amazed at what they saw. The dogs were wagging their tails, playing with the condemned minister, licking his feet. The king was baffled at what he saw. "What happened to the dogs?" he growled. The minister then said, "I served the dogs for only 10 days, and they didn't forget my service. I served you for 10 years, and you forgot everything at the first mistake." The king realized his mistake and said, "Starting from this moment, I want the dogs replaced with crocodiles." A fictional king, of course, but a leader that we might recognize from our history books, or even in modern day times, for their egotism, their thirst for supreme power and control, and their inability to see and acknowledge the truth of a situation. So let's see why kings are appointed in the first place, by reflecting on a thumbnail sketch of the making of biblical kings. Running through the entire Bible is the acknowledgement that God, as sovereign ruler of the universe, is the all-powerful and glorious King who reigns forever and ever and rules over all. From Psalm number 10 the Lord is King forever and ever, to Revelation 15, where God is described as King of the nations. But during the period of the Old Testament, Israel's national life functioned under various types of government. The absolute leadership of Moses, a federation of self-governing tribes, a united monarchy, a divided monarchy, and a governorship controlled by a foreign overlord. It was during the period when the various tribes looked after their own affairs, and things were going wrong because the people of Israel no longer obeyed God and were unfaithful to him, that they hit on the idea of appointing a king who would rule over the whole nation through a central government in order to create and maintain sustainability and stability. Like most good ideas without substance and ignoring the underlying reason for the instability, it did not take long to unravel. After many and various good and bad kings down the centuries, it was widely understood that King David had been the best one. And so the Israelite people still hoped for the day when the dynasty of David would be restored to power. They looked for one who would be the ideal king, the great descendant of David, whom they called the Lord's anointed one, or in the Hebrew language, the Messiah. In contrast to the kings of a former era, this king would rule with perfect wisdom, power, love, and justice. And so we move speedily forward some 4,000 years and find ourselves in Pilate's headquarters, where we find Jesus being interrogated by the Roman governor. In this exquisite, descriptive conversation written for us by St. John, we discover that this Jesus is indeed the looked-for and longed-for king, but that those who had authority over his life or death had been looking for the wrong sort of king in the wrong sort of places. He may have been as indeed the ideal king, but he was not the king they wanted. Strangely, though, Pilate seems to see in Jesus qualities that others could not see or would not see. However, Pilate typifies that person or institution confronted with a critical decision, who has instincts in one direction but is pressurized to move in another. Pilate reminds Jesus that he has the power to release him or to crucify him, and is almost pleading with him to save himself by giving the right answers to his questions. But increasingly, the religious leaders rob him of his power and box him into a corner so that he eventually yields. Pilate, like most power brokers, lives in an illusion of power. There follows a conversation about kingship. "Are you a king?" asked Pilate. "My kingdom is not of this world," replies Jesus. "Then you are a king," says Pilate, obviously confused. Jesus answered, "You say that I am a king. For this I was born, and for this I came into the world, to testify to the truth. Everyone who belongs to the truth listens to my voice." Then the discourse widens as Pilate asks that age-old question, what is truth? We live in an age of untruth. Maybe we always have, but were not so aware of it before the onset of the internet and social media. But now we do know but now we do not know who to believe. Things come to light about people in politics on almost a daily basis that undermines the truth we believed about them. The Kremlin says it has no intention of invading Ukraine whilst massing its troops on the borders, and then it does. Trump is still protesting a stolen election and blaming fake news, and yet continues to spread fake news himself. Misinformation abounds on social media to the extent that QAnon, devised as a joke, is believed by the deluded and divides and destroys families. Who then do you believe? What is truth? Let's look again at the kingdom of God, the kingdom that Jesus alluded to when before Pilate. The kingdom of God was central to Jesus' teachings, yet nowhere did Jesus say exactly what that kingdom was. It seems, though, that Jesus understood God's kingdom as God's rule, rather than as a territory or as a people. The person who seeks God's kingdom, says Matthew, is the one who seeks God's rule in their life. The one who receives God's kingdom, says Mark, is the one who receives God's rule in their life. The person who enters the kingdom of God enters the realm where they accept God's rule. The kingdom of God is past, present, and future. Not only those of Jesus' time, but people of any era, when they believe in him, immediately enter his kingdom and receive the kingdom's blessings. That is us, you and me, followers of Jesus, Christ the King. That is us, you and me, who live in an age of uncertainty at every level. Global warming, food and fuel insecurity, inflation, strikes threatened by industry and services, fake news, financial instability, global, national, and personal. Where can we find trust and truth in that lot? We won't. We will only find it in the nature and the kingship of the one who said, "Everyone who belongs to the truth listens to my voice." We need to listen to that voice, believe that voice, and live as citizens of his kingdom. Amen.